what we're shooting for is companies that could be worth hundreds of millions, if not a billion, more north of $1 billion one day. Obviously not a big leap, but one day. And I think there's enough history around the forum, businesses to say that a single forum is going to be pretty challenging to get to that level of scale. I think most likely the way that you're going to see success from a venture perspective, it's a case of past is prologue. If you look at internet brands or something like that, the way you get to the sort of scale of hundreds of millions of dollars of value, that's probably tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions in revenue. That probably needs to come from an aggregation play, where you can find a number of different forums that can come together under a single roof, share a lot of infrastructure, and then frankly start to take advantage of what we talked about before, the decommoditization, having the critical mass to have a sales force that can go out and talk about the specifics of the forum, why it's worth doing something special, creating custom inventory, and then driving the advertising dollars up in that way. So I suspect that's probably the path. There have been a couple of people who've done that in the past, and a couple of people who are trying to do that today. From a venture perspective, that's what I would be looking for. I think that you asked about, is there a bubble? I think that there are some valuations that are getting out ahead of the intrinsic value of the company today, but I think that what they're looking towards is what some of these companies could become. And so, you're seeing companies that are, getting ready to go public today, companies like Roup here in Chicago or Grubhub, just outside of Chicago we recently invested in, that are coming out with very impressive valuations. But at the core is this understanding that, basically everybody's on the internet today. This is not a niche phenomenon, this is a mainstream, widespread phenomenon. And if you just play that out a couple of years, then you're going to see a very fundamental driven basis of value that I think is very good. If you count the number of single product sites, I wouldn't count Yahoo, for example, as a single product site. It's really finance, you have a page, and so forth. But if you count the number of single product sites that have gotten to 50 million users, you don't get very many. They're mostly the big social networks. You see a few that are picking up traffic, Huffington Post or something like that. But for every Huffington Post, there's a ton of sites that aspire to be that and didn't make it. So I think it's not that forums suck at it, and I think they do it all. I think it's just a really, really hard problem. And I think what it usually gets solved is exactly what I talked about. Yahoo is not a single site. Yahoo is an accumulation of sites. Some of them were literally born, like hot jobs, and some of them were built in there, like Yahoo Finance or Yahoo Mail. But that's how you get to the sort of scale that you need to be able to provide the attention of the advertisers in an interesting way. And I suspect the solution is similar in forums. The key question with raising capital is always to make sure that the interests of your investor align with your own interests. So for instance, if you hear me sitting up here saying, well, I'm looking for companies that are going to sell for hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, and you're sitting there saying, well, geez, that's not realistic for my business, then you would do yourself a disservice to take money from me, because at some point we're going to fight, because you want something that you believe to be true, and I want something that is different from that, and it sucks to fight with your investor. It's miserable. So the key is to just align yourself with the interests of your investor. So either believe that you could be a multi-hundred-million-dollar business, and believe it in your heart, not just saying it because that's the way that you get the money from the other guy. Because that just defers the fight. The fight will come, and it'll be worse at that point. Or go find an investor that shares your view. So if you think that what's realistic is that you might sell for $3 million, then find an investor who would be happy with a $3 million outcome. And that might be an angel investor, that might be friends and family, that might be someone that you've worked with in the past who believes in you, or it might be an enthusiast from within the community who just wants to support the forum and help them be successful. And if they're going to be happy with the outcome and you're going to be happy with the outcome, then you're going to be much more aligned so that when that outcome eventually comes to pass, no one's fighting.
I think intrinsic in the answer you just gave was that there will be an exit at some point. And certainly venture investors, I think there's always an exit plan. But I think there's perhaps an old-fashioned notion of the investor who just owns a share and takes a share of the profits, or maybe one day sells a share. Does that sort of still exist in this business? I don't know if that's in your zone at all, but if you have any comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example of making sure that your interests are aligned with that of your investor. So again, any institutional investor, whether it be a big fund like Lightspeed or small seed fund, and there are all these seed funds out there now, they might write a $100,000 check or a $250,000 check. If it's an institutional investor, they have an obligation to return capital to their investors. And usually that means that there's a closed end to their fund. So 10 years is a typical thing. At the end of that 10 years, if they don't return capital to their investors, it's like they lost it. Right? So they're pretty incented to push for an exit in that 10-year window. Otherwise, it's like the money just fell to the floor and no one got everything back. On the other hand, a lot of individuals can take a much longer view, and they might be very happy with clipping a coupon and taking share dividends or whatever. Or if it's the case of somebody who is an active participant in the community, they may be comfortable with no return. Just being happy that they know that the forum that they spend so much of their time on continues to thrive and grow in ways that they can get to affect because they get to sit next to you as the forum owner and give you feedback and suggestions and so forth. And maybe they get their sort of return on their investment through having a seat at the table and a voice on the discussion. So there are lots of ways that this can happen. But down towards that end, it becomes a very idiosyncratic thing that's dependent on the personalities of the people involved. It's harder to generalize. I think the recent Google change with Panda is something that a lot of people are really spending a lot of time thinking about. There's a true measure of quality, which I think biases towards the forums where there's genuine conversation taking place and it's fun in a lot of instances. I think that we're only going to see more of that. This idea of kind of astroturf relative to the real grass is going to become more and more difficult to build a business on. And that I think will bias towards forums and away from some of these kind of content factories that are trying to pick a trade and then pay people whatever $10 an article to write on.
Facebook and I think a lot of these services like Quora and Google Plus really insist on real names and real identities. And I think there's a pretty deep tradition in the forum community of pseudonymity, and aliases. What do you think is going on there, and how do you think that's going to play out?
I think that there are lots of different ways to be successful. Certainly, Google Plus and Facebook have focused on real names because that's where they came from. Their core unit has always been, and this is sort of the information architecture question, right? It's like within social media sites, what's your atom? For Facebook, the atom is a profile page. The atom is the person, and that means real identity is really important, and everything comes from that atom. Whereas I would argue for a lot of forums, the atom is the discussion thread. It's the question or the first post, which then comes off of that. And so it's really that is core, and less so who said those things. It's more what was said. And I'd say that Quora is a good example of something that, although it does require real names, really suppresses the names in a lot of ways. And so, again, it makes that question Q&A pair the core atom. The main question is really the question is the atom, and then the answers come off of that. So that's their information architecture. And for instance, they anonymize. Well, it's not anonymous. It's very difficult to discover who asked the original question. And that's deliberate because it's not about the person, it's about the question. So, great.
So any final thoughts or advice for the audience, and then I think we'll have a couple minutes for questions.
You know, I mean, I think that everything that's old is new again. And I think that's one of the things that we've seen over the last few years. That is not to say that it can be done in the old way, but the behaviors don't change over time for people. And there's been a real depth of history around forums that has been one of the mainstays of the internet since the beginning, since AOL, since CompuServe, and Prodigy. I think that it serves two purposes. One is this, is a need for discussion, information around particular topics. The other one is just this sort of more social aspect. That, I think, is starting to drift more away towards the social networks. But that core idea of engagement around the topic of mutual interest, I think, is always going to be the core of forums. And I see that to have a long, bright future, as far as I can see.
Great, thank you very much. It's good time for just a couple of questions from the audience.
A question for you. Should forum owners fear Facebook? When we got together in February in San Francisco, there was it was a group hug. We were kind of nervous about what this huge elephant was going to do to us. So, where do you see Facebook heading in terms of opportunity versus competition for forum owners?
Being afraid of Facebook is like being afraid of Microsoft back in like the 80s, right? Which is they could do anything, and they could probably crush any one of you if they chose to. The question is, will they? I think that all companies can only do 3 things well at a time. It's just a question of focus. And so the question is crushing you going to be one of their top 3? Because if it's not one of their top 3, it's probably not going to get done. And I would argue that right now, the things that are really important for Facebook are probably, opening up the social graph and pushing that data out, even more widely. It's international, and it's probably, credits / gaming / all the implications for that. Maybe those 3 are wrong, but I'm pretty sure that, owning discussion groups and forums probably doesn't even make their top 10 and maybe not their top 100. They've just got a lot of other things to do. So yes, they could crush you, but whether they will or not, I'm not sure.
Thank you. Anyone else? One more. Down here.
Does a firm like yours approach, do you identify businesses or sites that you think that you want to invest in, and do you approach them, or do you have more of a business model where people want to grow to a next level or just sell their business and approach you?
It can happen either way. Although if someone is selling a business, then we're probably not the right people to talk to. We're more interested in investing in a company that wants to continue to grow, the view towards an eventual exit of a lot. We're not operators. We can't run a business for someone. What we can do is provide capital for growth, to support a plan that someone else has, someone else's vision, and we could be, strategic thought partners for that person as they pursue their plan, and we can be facilitators with introductions for hiring, business development, and so forth. So, I would say that probably 2/3 of the companies we invest in came to us, and perhaps 1/3 we had a view that, for instance, that entertainment commerce was going to be big, so we went out trying to meet the companies in that space. We're better critics than we are writers, and so, I think we prefer to be able to react to other people's ideas because we're not smart enough to come up with ideas of our own.
Thank you. I saw there was one more question. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Kevin Dodson from YapMap. So, Facebook is a classic two-sided network which tends towards monopoly. Forums have been resistant to that kind of consolidation, pretty fragmented. The other dynamics of what drives one towards, monolithic central network, and forums don't tend to go that way.
Yeah, I think,
Or will they go that way? I guess.
well, they haven't yet. But I think that's been less driven by business model and more driven by the preferences of the forum owners. You know, there are a lot of advantages, I think, for consolidation around value accretion. So shared services is one obvious one, but I think what we talked about before, this idea that you can afford a direct sales force, which could essentially increase the size of the pie. That's something that I think gets very difficult if you're subscale. The trade-off is you're not your own boss anymore, right? You're part of a larger organization, and you know, a lot of forum owners. I think people have to make their own decisions about, you know, would I rather be rich or be in charge to some extent. I, as an investor, prefer to invest in people who would rather be rich than in charge. That's what I would rather be. But you know, I think it's a very legitimate question that people can answer in different ways quite reasonably, depending on how they prioritize what's important to them. And I would never say this is right or wrong. It's just people have different preferences and they should do what they want. But there are strong reasons towards consolidation. They are primarily financial, and so people then have to decide what they want to do.
You know, actually that raises an interesting question for me. I think the forum space is still interestingly fragmented as far as the underlying software. You know, I think that blogs, in contrast, I think have seen big consolidation towards you know, being hosted by somebody else and consolidation. Certainly there are people in the room, you know, trying to enable just this in forums, but I think, what do you think drives that? Why are forums being resistant to that kind of servers run by someone else and you know, and the de-diversification of the underlying software?
I think it's a function of how much effort is required to run a forum versus how much effort is required to run a blog. I think that the level of overall technical expertise required to run a forum is far greater than that of a blog. And then the level of overall commitment to managing the community and keeping it in good order and not letting it go feral is another thing. And so once you're making that level of commitment, it becomes pretty close to a full-time job, if not a full-time job. At which point, you know, using off-the-shelf software, you know, you then decide whether or not that's actually exactly what you want or not. For a lot of bloggers, they lack the sort of technical expertise. It's not a full-time job; it's a hobby for many of them, for most of them, and so they're happy to use off-the-shelf stuff.
Great, cool.